How to play Alaria Valor and Company. Hi everyone, this is a special episode of Firebreathing Kittens. I'm the game master for an upcoming session using the rules for Alaria Valor and Company. This episode is a summary of what I learned after reading the rulebook. Hopefully this will be a handy guide for how to play for my players, will help me organize myself, and will be useful for you listeners too who are looking to play Alaria Valor and Company yourselves. I'll organize this how to play guide into sections. The theme of the game, how to attack, combat between two enemy groups, how to use skills, and lastly, how to build a character. Theme of the game. Alaria is the name of the setting. Valor and Company is the name of the rules, the system, the mechanics. In Alaria Valor and Company, challenges are resolved using a deck of cards instead of dice. The more accurate an attack, the more damage it does, with the most accurate attacks becoming critical hits that also push the target with force, and the least accurate attacks becoming glancing blows that halve the wounds dealt. Characters are built by choosing a base character build called a station, a type, and a few traits, and allocating your core stat points, which will then determine how skilled you are at various tasks. Alaria Valor and Company is designed to easily allow you, the player, to control one or more than one player character at a time. If you enjoy controlling 2 or 3 or more player characters at a time, this game welcomes that idea. Of course, you can also control only one player character if you prefer that. How to attack. Your attack hits your target if the aim number on your character sheet meets or beats their lower deflection threshold. If your aim number is the same or more than your target's higher deflection threshold, you critically hit them, doubling the damage dealt and pushing them back with force. If your aim number is lower than your target's lowest deflection threshold, then you're only able to do glancing blows on them that deal half damage. Here is an example. Your aim is 2. Your target's deflection thresholds are 1 for the lower threshold and 3 for the higher threshold. Your aim meets or beats the lower threshold of 1, but not the higher threshold of 3. You deal normal damage. There are 3 types of attack damage: energy, force, and wounds. Each attack also has its own type of resistance. Energy attacks are resisted by integrity. For example, wearing an insulated suit that has 2 integrity reduces energy damage taken by 2. Force attacks push you around and are resisted by poise. For example, the grappler trait increases your character's poise by 1, making you less likely to be shoved backward. If you deal 1 force, you knock your opponent back, pushing them. Push the opponent into a stationary object, and they take damage equal to the force of the attack. If you deal 2 force damage, you knock your opponent down, and they are prone on the ground. If you deal 3 force, your opponent is flung through the air, landing prone, and maybe their weapon got separated from them. In mechanics terms, that means they're now prone, and the person who dealt 3 force chooses to either push them back a space or disarm them. Wound attacks are resisted by hardness. Every point of hardness an armor has reduces an incoming wound by 1. For example, a gambeson has 1 hardness and plate armor has 3 hardness. Wearing a gambeson means you reduce incoming wound damage by 1. If an attack is penetrating, that means it pierces your armor and ignores hardness. For example, an incoming arrow with penetration 2 ignores 2 points of hardness, which punches right through the gambeson, but is partially resisted by the plate armor. Shields are good at all 3 types of protection: hardness, integrity, and poise. When you see capital letters and a number next to a weapon, they stand for the following. Capital W is wounds, how many wound damage the weapon does. Capital H, which stands for hardness, resists wounds. Capital W, capital E stands for energy, how much energy damage that spell does. Capital I, integrity, resists energy. Capital P for penetration ignores the target's hardness. Capital F, force bonus, pushes the target around. Capital P lowercase o, poise, resists being pushed around by force. If the amount of wounds you deal to your target is below 1, for example, if your aim is lower than their deflection threshold, so you have to halve your attack and deal only 1/2 of a wound, You only graze them, capital G for graze. Sort of like how in baseball with 3 strikes you're out, the 4th graze dealt in a round finally hits the target for 1 wound. A half and a half and a half and a half do eventually deal 1 wound. Each combatant has 1 standard action, 1 swift action, and 1 movement on their turn. Here is the list of standard actions a player can do on their turn. If you're already right next to your target and don't need to move or aim, the most powerful standard action is to double swing, which lets you weapon attack 2 times. Declare both attack targets before making your first attack. Another standard action you can do is the aimed strike, which is a single weapon attack with an extra point in aim. For example, if you're in a fight with an enemy who you just can't hit because your character's aim is 1 lower than what you need to overcome their lowest deflection threshold, then use the aimed strike. Aimed strike reduces your weapon attacks from 2 swings of the sword to 1 swing, but with +1 to your aim, you just might hit them. Another example standard action you can take is to advance, which is moving your movement speed and attacking at the end of the movement. When coupled with your normal movement, the advance standard action gets you 1 attack and 2 movements overall in your turn, letting you reach an opponent that was very far away. Even if you can't reach them, you can always turn your standard action into extra movement. More things you can do with your standard action. You can use your standard action to treat a status condition on an ally or yourself, which reduces its duration by 1. For example, Acid 2 would have lasted 2 turns, but after treating, becomes Acid 1, which only lasts 1 turn. Along with Treat, another standard action you can use is Prepare. You can use Prepare as your standard action, which gets you half of your max focus points immediately. Your focus points can temporarily exceed your max focus until the start of your next turn. You can spend 2 focus points to do a bonus action during your turn, or spend 1 focus to do a reaction on an opponent faction's turn. For high-level characters who have will, you can Recover as your standard action. Recover resets your will points to their maximum value if you have any. Most low-level characters start with 0 will. Using a skill is also a standard action, such as performing a knowledge roll or identify, etc. And lastly, you might have some character-specific traits that can be used as your standard action. You have 1 standard action, 1 swift action, and 1 movement on each of your turns. Swift actions can be used to speak in character, and also to use the identify skill and to clear. Clearing is a high-level ability for characters who have will points. Clearing spends 1 point of will to reduce a condition's duration by 1 as a swift action. An example of clear is if you had the panicked 1 condition. You can use clear as a swift action to spend 1 will to reduce it from panicked 1 to panicked 0. A condition that is reduced to 0 ends. Your swift action can also be used for character-specific traits if you have any that can be used as a swift action. Movement in Alaria Valor and Company includes normal movement up to your character's maximum movement speed, crawling, which is movement half of your maximum movement speed in the prone position, and standing up, where you stand up out of the prone position for your whole movement. Difficult terrain halves your maximum movement. Climbing doesn't reduce your movement speed at all. Carrying an object with bulk greater than your maximum load reduces your movement by 1 point for each point of bulk over your max load. You can use your movement on your turn to raise your shield, which lets you then later use a reaction to apply your shield's protection to your character. And lastly, you can use your movement to Overwatch. Overwatch sets up an area, usually the length of your weapon, that you are protecting. If an enemy enters your Overwatch area, that prompts an attack of opportunity. Attacks of opportunity are when you spend a focus point to do a single weapon attack. If an enemy inside your Overwatch area attacks with a ranged weapon or tries to treat their ally or draws their weapon to fight you, those also prompt an attack of opportunity, and you can attack them with a single weapon attack if you spend a focus. You can spend 2 focus points to do a bonus action during your turn, or spend 1 focus to do a reaction on an opponent faction's turn. Here are the list of reactions you can do during an opponent's turn. You can spend 1 focus to react to Dodge. Dodge reduces an incoming attack's wounds to half and reduces its force by 1. You can react to block using your raised shield, which lets you apply your shield's effect. You can react to relocate, which uses up to half of your movement speed, up to once per turn. You can spend one focus point to use the reaction of the attack of opportunity, a single weapon attack, if you've set up an Overwatch area, using your movement, on a previous turn. You can spend a focus to use your reaction to duck and cover, which gives you +2 deflection points against all ranged attacks. You can use your reaction to play dead, which is when you lie on the ground and don't move. The enemy performs an awareness scan, and you perform a stealth subterfuge, and the results determine if you have tricked them into thinking you're dead. You can use your reaction to intervene. Intervening is when you're next to a friend and want to redirect an enemy's attack onto yourself to take the damage from the attack in your friend's place without dodging. Combat between two enemy groups. The side that starts combat is called the aggressor. The other side is the defender. Everyone on the same side attacks before anyone on the other side has the opportunity to go. A faction does 5 things on its turn. 1. Everyone refreshes half of their maximum focus rounded down. You can spend 2 focus points to do a bonus action during your turn, or spend 1 focus to do a reaction on an opponent faction's turn. 2. Any status effect wound damage is applied. 3. Any effect or condition with a duration count ticks down its count or ends. 4. All combatants belonging to the same faction can take their actions in any order. Each combatant has 1 standard action, 1 swift action, and 1 movement on their turn. For example, you can swift action shout to all the enemies that if they flee you won't pursue them, move up to their ringleader, and standard action aimed strike the ringleader. 5. The faction declares the end of its turn, which might prompt some of their opponents to use a reaction before the turn ends. Altogether, these 5 steps are called a combat round, and the round took 6 seconds. Here's an example of Step 1, refreshing their focus. Every player gets half of their maximum focus rounded down. For example, if one person's max focus is 4, they would gain 2 focus during this step. Here's an example of Step 2, applying status effect wounds. If an enemy's attack left you with On Fire 2 last turn, you would now take 1 wound from being on fire. Here's an example of Step 3, ticking down duration. If you're temporarily blinded by a flashbang, you get a number with how long being blinded lasts. For example, the status effect Blindness 2 ticks down to Blindness 1. When, in the future, it ticks down to Blindness 0, you can see again. Here is an example of Step 4, the action turn. A melee fighter swordswoman, Cora, uses her movement to run up to 2 enemy wizards. Her ally ranged fighter, the archer Percy, uses his standard action to aimed strike, getting +1 aim and sending his arrow into the enemy wizard on the left. Percy was hoping that the enemy wizard on the left would go down from his arrow, but the enemy wizard isn't down and continues summoning the malevolent energy. The party's got to stop the ritual before the Dark Lord is summoned. So Cora, the fighter, uses her standard action of double swing to use 2 weapon attacks on the enemies, declaring her targets that she's hitting first the wizard on the left and then the wizard on the right. The ranged archer Percy acted in between the fighter Cora's 2 actions. Party members don't have to expend their standard action and swift action and movement all at the same time. The players are allowed to move and attack in between one another. This makes it easy to control multiple characters. Here is an example of Step 5, the faction declaring the end of its turn. The wizard on the left is lying unconscious after Cora's swing. The wizard on the right spends 1 focus to use their reaction to duck and cover, which gives them +2 deflection to not being hit by the archer Percy's next arrow. Here are the stealth rules. In combat, an enemy is either undetected, known about, or observed. If you can observe the enemy, you are prepared and gain half of your maximum focus rounded down. If you know the enemy exists but not where they are, you gain your focus but can't use reactions to the enemy's stealth actions. If the enemy is completely undetected and unknown about, you both don't gain half of your maximum focus at the start of the round, and you can't use reactions to the enemy's stealth actions. How to use skills. You can use your skills to do things outside of combat. These are called tasks. Alaria Valor and Company uses a deck of cards instead of dice. It's possible to play this game with everyone using their own deck of cards, which makes it a bit easier to play online than systems that require everyone to share a deck of cards. To do a task, first name a suit. For example, clubs or hearts. Then, draw your skill's number of cards from the deck. Your goal is to match that suit you named. Jokers count as all the suits. If you drew one card of the suit you were aiming for, you have 1 degree of success. 2 cards of the target suit is 2 degrees of success, etc. If your fellow player's character has at least 1 point in specialization in a skill, they can assist you with a task. For every person who's assisting, draw 1 extra card. Here is an example skill check, which is called a task in Alaria Valor and Company. Let's say you want to convince a shopkeeper to discount your purchase by 30%. The Game Master calls for a task. You name a suit, diamonds. You look at your social skill. Your social skill is 3, so you draw 3 cards. None of them are diamonds, so you start to feel a bit concerned. Your friend sees that their character has 3 points of specialization in the social skill, so they offer to assist. Role-playing, they remind the shopkeeper of the sign outside saying, "This item's on sale." Mechanically, 1 person helping you means you get to draw 1 extra card. You draw a diamond, and achieve 1 degree of success. Opposed skill checks, also called opposed tasks, can also be performed in Alaria Valor and Company. Opposed tasks can't be assisted by your party members. It's just you and the person you're trying to lie to or hide from. One example of a time when you'd do an opposed task would be if you were trying to sneak and a guard non-player character was trying to see you. Do you sneak successfully, or did the guard spot you? Opposed task time! The person attempting to deceive the other draws half the number of cards they have in that skill. For example, if your sneak is 4, you'd name a suit like hearts, and then draw 2 cards, hoping to draw hearts. The Game Master representing the guard draws the number of cards of the guard's skill. The guard has an awareness of 2, so the Game Master draws 2 cards. If you draw 1 heart, and the guard draws 0 hearts, you sneak by undetected. If the Game Master draws more hearts than you, the guard sees you. If you both draw the same number of hearts, do the opposed skill check again. How to build a character. Your Alaria Valor and Company character sheet has a few different areas to it. There are stations, types, stats, attributes, skills, and traits. As I tell you about each of these, I will refer to the example character build that's on page 14 of the rulebook. Every character has a station. Stations are like pre-built half-page backstory biographies you add to your character sheet. They include a story about where you came from. Stations also come with an influence level, which is your character's reputation in society. And there's a card trick the player can use. Pick one of the 2. For example, drawing an extra card or discarding under certain conditions. Stations tell you the wealth level of the character. Stations also list goals that if you fulfill during roleplay, you can use the list of upgrades. For example, if you complete the scholar's goals of researching, gaining reputation in the clergy, and pilgrimaging to different churches, you can upgrade that scholar into a monk or a priest station. It looks like these advanced stations will probably be available in future versions of Valor and Company. The stations are pre-written and you simply pick one, so that's pretty easy. Page 54 has 6 options to pick from that each look like half a page of text. Stations are like an index card-sized, pre-written character backstory. Station options include Wanderer, Mountaineer, Scholar, Merchant, Performer, and Craftsman. For the example character build, the player chose Mountaineer. The Mountaineer station comes with a story about how they construct paths in the untamed wild mountains. They come with an influence called Scout's Honor, where they are generally viewed as a service worker by the common folk. And it says they can get maps of upcoming areas from their Mountaineer friends. The Mountaineer station comes with 2 card tricks for you to pick one from. This helps you, the player, return cards you don't like, or reveal the top card of the deck, change your hand size, etc. card trick. The Mountaineer station comes with a wealth rating, which for Mountaineers is none. They don't have a lot of money. For comparison, to show an example of a different station, the Merchant starts with 1 XP worth of items for each character level they have. The Mountaineer station also has its own goals and upgrades, similar to the Scholar I mentioned earlier. If you fulfill goals like being a reputed guide and resolving an encounter with hostile wildlife without violence, you can upgrade from a Mountaineer into a Pioneer. All characters will be one of 3 types. You can be a Martial type, a Specialist type, or an Operator type. Martials gain an additional stat increase to start, and when they level up to even levels, they can choose one stat that is half their level or less and add 1 to it. Specialists can waive one of the trait requirements, which gets them better traits. And specialists also get an extra point in specialization, which improves how good you are at a skill. Operators choose one stat or skill proficiency and boost it by 1 when using equipment and abilities. For this example, the player chose Martial. They immediately increased one of their stats by 1. The Martial type also means that when they leveled up to level 2, they increased any one low stat that was half their level or lower by 1. Stats are the character's core ability numbers you use to calculate how talented you are at skills and which traits you can have. The following stats all start at 0. Off, which stands for offense. Def, which stands for defense. AGI stands for agility. TCT stands for tactics. STR stands for strategy. UTI stands for utility. Level 1 characters start with 2 stat points. Every time you level up, you get 3 more points to distribute among those stats. My players will be level 2, so they get 2 stat points from their first level and 3 stat points from leveling up once, for 5 stat points total to spend. If you're a Martial type, they get 1 extra point to start, and then upon reaching the even-numbered level 2, they also have 1 extra point to spend on any single low stat that was a 0 or a 1. That's 7 stat points total for Martial types at level 2, and 5 stat points for every other type. Using the example character on page 14, the player is a Martial type level 2. They first put their 1 point from being a Martial, 2 points from level 1, and 3 points from level 2 into their stats. Offense 2, Defense 0, Agility 2, Tactics 2, Strategy 0, Utility 0. They then look at the stats that have a 0 or 1. Those are the ones eligible for the final stat increase. They choose Defense. The result is Offense 2, Defense 1, Agility 2, Tactics 2, Strategy 0, Utility 0. It's on page 14. Attributes are things that are on your character sheet that you calculate from your stats. This is a pretty simple list of calculations, so I'll just read it. You simply plug the numbers in. Here goes, I'm reading a list. Wounds. Characters have 2 plus, and this is in parentheses, level plus defense, end parentheses, divided by 2 wounds. So add your level, which is like 2, plus your defense, which is like 2, you get 4. Divide that by 2, and you get 2. And then you add 2, and you're at 4. So you have 4 wounds if you have 2 defense and you're at level 2. That's the number of wounds you have. Every time you get injured, subtract 1. Try not to reach 0 wounds. Next, deflection. Characters start with a deflection threshold of -1 and 1. Both the lower and the upper deflection thresholds increase by 1 for every 2 points of defense. For example, a character with 2 defense has a deflection of 0, 2. An enemy with an aim of 0 hits you for normal damage, and an enemy with an aim of 2 critically hits you for double damage. Focus. Focus is equal to 2 plus, and this is parentheses, agility divided by 2, rounded down. So half of your agility plus 2 equals your focus, round down. Movement speed. Movement speed is 4 plus your agility, number of tiles. Will. Characters will only gain will through traits or stations. This is left at 0 for now. Fatigue. Gain 1 fatigue every time you're knocked unconscious. Fatigue reduces the maximum wounds of a character. Aim. The accuracy of attacks increases by 1 for every 2 points of offense. If you have 2 offense, you have 1 aim. If you have 4 offense, you have 2 aim. If you have 6 offense, you have 3 aim. Total load. Characters have a total load of 4 plus their defense. Equipment load. Characters have an equipment load of 1 plus their defense divided by 2. So if your defense is 2, 2 divided by 2 is 1, plus 1 means you have a character equipment load of 2. It's 1 plus half of your defense. That's your equipment load. Skills represent how good your character is at doing things outside of combat. Hiding, identifying creatures, lifting weights, checking for traps, convincing a guard to let a prisoner escape. Your skill number is how many cards you draw when you're doing that task. The skill number is the sum of adding the proficiency and specialization points together. Add your specialization points and your proficiency points together to see how good you are at that skill and how many cards you draw. Proficiencies all start at 1 and are increased by increasing your stats. For every 2 stat points, add 1 point to the corresponding skill. I will list all 6 stats and the skills they add proficiency points to. The 6 stats are offense, defense, agility, tactics, strategy, utility. For every 2 stat points in offense, add 1 proficiency point to your technique skill. An example of technique is if you want to skillfully forge a written document. For every 2 stat points in defense, add 1 proficiency point to your endurance skill. Swimming, climbing, and pushing heavy objects are all endurance examples. For every 2 stat points in agility, add 1 proficiency point to your dexterity skill. You'll use dexterity when you react, maneuver quickly, or jump. For every 2 stat points in tactics, add 1 proficiency point each to the 3 skills awareness, stealth, and identify. Awareness is how good you are at telling an enemy is nearby and overhearing conversations. Stealth is used for sneaking around without being detected. The identify skill is used for telling whether or not something is dangerous, identifying a friendly or hostile creature or item. For every 2 stat points in strategy, add 1 proficiency point each to the skills social, observe, and calculate. Social is your skill at diplomacy, intimidation, and lying. Observe is the skill used for telling if someone is dishonest when talking to them. Calculate is a somewhat meta skill you, the player, can use to get information your character would be able to see about the enemy, like their movement speed, what weapons they have, what the target's protection number is. For every 2 stat points in utility, add 1 proficiency point each to the skills magic, society, and environment, which are 3 knowledge skills. Magic is your knowledge of magical history and how magic works. Society is your knowledge about who's who in the world, and you can use it to identify someone's station. Environment is your knowledge of the environment around you, for example, which natural creatures live here. Your proficiency number at each of these skills is 1 for the base, plus another point for each 2 points in the corresponding stat. The number of cards you draw for each of these skills is equal to your proficiency plus your specialization. You can get 2 specialization points by leveling up, by increasing your stats, and by being a specialist type. Level 2 characters get 2 points in specializations. Add your offense, defense, and agility stats together. For every 2 points in offense, defense, and agility combined, a character gets 1 specialization point they can put in any skill. For example, if your character has 4 points in the sum of offense, defense, and agility, you would get 2 specialization points to allocate. After adding the 2 specialization points from being level 2 and 1 from being a specialist type, your specialist type character would have 5 points to distribute amongst skills in the specialization column at level 2. How many cards would you draw to see how far your character can push that heavy object? Add your proficiency and specialization skill points together to get your total skill number, which is how many cards you draw. All characters have a base of 1 proficiency in every skill. You're going to draw at least 1 card. This character has an extra point of proficiency in endurance because they have 2 defense stat points. They also had put 1 point in their endurance specialization. Base 1 plus 1 from defense, that's 2 points of proficiency plus 1 point of specialization, that's 3 points in the endurance skill total. This example character from page 14 would draw 3 cards, and those 3 cards would tell them how far they push that heavy object. Name a suit, for example, spades. Draw 3 cards. Are any of them spades? Maybe they got 1 spade, or 0 spades, or 2. Experience, also called XP, is a commodity that you spend to buy things. You have 2 XP at level 1, 5 XP at level 2, 9 XP at level 3, 14 XP at level 4, and 20 XP at the maximum level, which is 5. You might spend XP to buy traits or equipment or other things. Traits are special abilities you can claim to do if you qualify for them. Traits are listed on page 59, and there are many trait options to pick from. Shield Training, Combat Medic, Power Attack, Evasion, Improved Focus, Extra Movement, Extra Attacks, and Unlocking Magic Spell Lists are all example traits. Each trait has 2 parts to it: a prerequisite requirement you need to have to qualify for that trait, and a thing your character can now do. The Sneak Attack trait has the prerequisite requirement that you first must have 2 points in your Tactics stat. Once you qualify and claim that trait, then every time you sneak attack, you add 1 wound to attacks against unaware targets and to flanked targets. Here's another example trait. The Mental Guard trait has no prerequisite requirements. You gain 1 maximum will, and can use your reaction on your turn to put up even more mental guards and gain another +1 will until the start of your turn. Here's one last example trait. The Mount trait has a prerequisite of 1 point in your strategy stat, and you have to be at least level 2. You gain a basic mount, and there is another trait you can gain access to at level 4 that lets you get an improved mount. If you want to cast magic spells, please read the utility traits on page 66. Some example utility traits are Arcane 1, where you can access the Arcane 1 list and 1 Arcane slot. Arcane 2, even better spells. More example utility traits are extra Arcane slots, more powerful Arcane lists, divine spell lists, chaos attunement, summoning, alchemy, poisons, blessings, divine strike, spell blades, and more. How many traits you can have depends on your level and stats. At level 1, your character starts by claiming 2 traits. Every level you gain, you claim an additional trait. You also get specific traits from having points in your tactics, strategy, and utility stats. Every point in tactics grants a bonus combat trait. Every point in your strategy stat grants a bonus strategic trait. Every point in utility grants a bonus utility trait. Equipment are items that require a prerequisite minimum number of skill points. Sometimes equipment costs experience to buy too. There are a lot of equipment to pick from starting on page 88. Armor is equipment, for example the chainmail that requires your character to have at least 3 endurance skill points to wear. The chainmail armor gives you 2 hardness, capital H, 0 integrity, capital I, and 1 poise, capital P, lowercase o. Weapons are also equipment. For example, melee weapons like a short sword, scimitar, or hammer, and ranged weapons like throwing axes and crossbows. Your character needs to have at least 2 endurance to wield a hammer. Your character needs to have at least 2 technique to use a throwing knife. The 2-handed weapon, the harpoon, deals 1 wound, capital W, has 1 piercing penetration, capital P, and 0 force, capital F. It has the impale feature. All features are defined on page 89. This one means if you damage the enemy, then you can decide to pull them to you and enter grapple with them. To use a harpoon, you need to have at least 3 technique and 2 endurance skill points. Tools are also equipment. They're listed on page 95 and include tools like the pickaxe, which lets you clear rock away and has a required technique skill of 2 and endurance skill of 3. Another tool is the alarm cube, which costs 1 of your XP to buy. Remember, level 2 characters have 5 XP. And a last example tool is the chameleon cloak, which lets you alter your appearance and has the requirements of 2 stealth skill points and having the Chaos Tap trait and costs 2 XP. Remember that you have a maximum load and a maximum load from equipment. For every point your bulk exceeds your maximum load, you subtract that number as a penalty from your stealth, dexterity, movement, and twice as much for swimming. So that's everything I have for you. Hopefully this little rules chat helps my players build their characters and understand combat and skills. For everyone listening, we encourage you to find the Alaria Valor And Company rulebook yourself and play a game with friends. And if you'd like to hear an example adventure, I'm looking forward to playing Alaria Valor And Company in an upcoming session. Goodbye!